Hello, you viewers. This is Abhishek from Analog Thoughts. I'm a photographer based on the east coast of Canada, and in this video, I am going to show you how I have configured the custom buttons on my Fujifilm x100VI camera, and also talk about some menu items that make my photography flow much easier. I use this camera for street photography, travel photography, and as a general everyday carry camera. So the settings that I will be showing you today work out the best for me in those scenarios. The settings will also apply to the predecessor, which is the x100v, and I used to own that camera before I upgraded to this one. So if you own a Fujifilm x100v, these settings will also apply to you. So take what you like from this video, and if some setting doesn't work out for you, you can disregard that. So let's jump right into it. So the way you can quickly access the function button setting, where it will let you configure these custom buttons, is by long pressing the DISP back button, the display back button. And this Bluetooth icon is only on the X100VI. It won't be there on the X100V because they have added an extra menu item here which lets you configure your Bluetooth settings and pair devices with the camera. So I'm going to long press on the DISP back button here, and as you can see that it takes me to the function setting layout here, which shows me the buttons and how I can customize those here. So the first button that I want to talk about is the FN1, which is the function 1 button, and that's the button that you can see right here by the exposure dial. So since I've applied a skin on my camera, I've also covered that button with a sticker that came with the skin, but it's right next to the exposure dial, so that's how you can find it. And it sits right next to the shut button as well, so very easy placement for me to access it. Now the menu item that I've linked this button with is the ND filter. So if you buy the camera out of the box, the ND filter is by the flick of this switch right here. So you have to flick it and you have to hold it for a few seconds, and that's what toggles the ND filter on and off. But I found that a little bit of a time consuming thing, and that's why I have chosen this button as a quick ND filter on and off button. Now that is very helpful when I am shooting a video outside out in the bright daylight and I want to shoot wide open, or even if I'm in a bright scenario where I want to shoot some pictures and my shutter speed is going to max out and I want to shoot at wide open. So that's where this button comes into play, and it's the easy access for me to switch the ND filter on and off. So all you have to do for this button is you have to press on it and find the ND filter and assign it to that. So let's see how this works. I'm going to go back here and I'm going to press this button, and you can see my ND filter was turned on by the press of a button and it's turned off here. So it's very convenient to use the ND filter on this button for me personally. So the next button that I've customized here is the FN2 button. As you can see in the picture, it's right here, and if you want to find where that button is on the camera quickly, it's on this switch right here. So you can press this button in and out, and since I have a skin here, as I've said before, this button is also covered by the skin. So the menu item that I have configured this button to is the face detection on and off, and if you press on it here, this is the menu that you should be looking for. The reason that you would want to do this is if you're out shooting in the street and there's a lot of faces around, and let's say you're shooting a subject and the camera picks up automatically a different face that you don't want to photograph, this is where you would want to turn that off. So by putting it on a button that's easily accessible right here for me, I can decide to turn it off if I don't want it to catch some face that I don't want to photograph. This is also helpful if you are shooting a scene which doesn't have any human faces. So this is probably also where you would want to turn that off, because you don't want camera to be trying to look for a face in a scene which doesn't have any faces for it to catch. So the next four menu items here, as you can see, I have not configured anything to those. And the reason that I haven't assigned anything here is because those are your touch functions, meaning that you can swipe down, swipe left, right, and up, and then assign a menu item to those gestures. The reason that I have turned it off, and I would also recommend you do the same, is because if you are out shooting and accidentally touch the screen somehow and that toggles something on or off for you, it might interfere in your shooting process without knowing that you have turned that menu option on or off, and that can be very frustrating. Or even if your camera is in your pocket and it's turned on something got touched on the screen and it just set something up that you don't want it to. So that is one thing that I would like to avoid. But it's a personal preference. You can choose to set something up here if you want to. I personally don't like anything configured for these touch functions here. The next function button is the AEL and AFL button, which is right here. So what I have set this to is AEL, which stands for Auto Exposure Lock. So what you can do is you can find this AE lock only menu item in order to set it up. And what this will do is basically it will let you set your exposure and lock it. So when I'm composing a shot and I have found the perfect exposure here, what I'll do is I'll just press this button and it locks the exposure. And now you can recompose your shot and take the picture. The next item in the list, if you go on the next page, is the R dial, which is the rear dial, which is this guy right here. So what I have assigned it to is the AF on. So this is my autofocus on button. So why this is like that is because I use back button focusing. So instead of focusing from half pressing the shutter button, I use this button as the back button focus. I have decoupled my focusing from this button here, and that's a menu item that you can find to decouple that. So what this does is this helps me focus from here by pressing it. So it's really helpful when I'm holding the camera like that and it's right where my thumb is, and it's an easy access focus button for me. The next button that I've customized here is the selector dial, and as you can see in the picture, it's the switch that I was talking about earlier, which you have to flick on the right, so like that, and you have to hold it for a second, I guess, for it to completely apply. So what I have assigned to this button is the auto ISO. The reason I've done that is because auto ISO lets you choose 3 different auto ISO settings in all Fujifilm cameras, and you can configure your minimum and maximum ISO range and also the minimum shutter speed. The one thing I hate about this setting is if the camera is able to determine that by choosing your minimum or maximum ISO or anything in between and the minimum shutter speed, it's still not able to get the perfect exposure. It will use a lower shutter speed than the one that you have defined here. So this is one menu setting that could cause a lot of blurry photos. So just keep in mind that the camera can override this setting at any time for the minimum shutter speed. I want to talk about the auto ISO setting now. The camera offers 3 auto ISO setting, and this is the shortcut that I have linked on to this switch here. So if I flick it on that side and hold it for a few seconds, it's going to trigger the auto ISO and lets me choose which one I want. You can also get to this in the menu. This is in your shooting setting, the third one here, and on the third page you'll find auto ISO setting here. So let's go through these one by one. The first one, auto 1, is what I use for general daytime street photography. Minimum sensitivity or ISO is 125, maximum is 800, and my minimum shutter speed that I feel like is plenty enough to capture motion is 1/250 of a second. This is my general everyday street photography auto ISO setting. The auto 2 is very similar to auto 1, but it just raises the maximum sensitivity up to 3200. So this is when I would want to use if it's evening time outside or the light is just about to decrease, or the nighttime is just about to start. So right around the evening time, this is when I would want to use this. The last one, auto 3, same minimum ISO, but the maximum ISO is the highest ISO that the camera supports is 12800 here, and my minimum shutter speed is also 1/500. So this is in those extreme scenarios when the light is really challenging outside and I don't want to miss the shot. So I keep the shutter speed high enough so that it freezes the motion, and also the highest sensitivity. I can deal with grain later in the image, but I would rather not miss the shot here. And the last button here is the Q menu, which is the quick menu. This is the Q button right here. I have just set it to quick menu because in the quick menu, I have configured a bunch of other settings that I will just show you in a second here. So let's take a look at the quick menu or the Q menu in my camera. The way to get there is by pressing this Q button right here. The first item that you see is your camera custom setting. Since I shoot in RAW and my photography mode is aperture priority, that's why it shows A here. If you shoot in manual mode, it's going to show you M. If you shoot in shutter priority, it's going to show you S. If you're using one of the 7 custom settings, C1 to C7, it's going to show you those based on what you have chosen here. So the next setting here is photometry, which is also known as metering modes. Photometry is basically a setting that controls how your camera measures the brightness of a subject and then calculates the exposure based on that. There are 4 photometry modes here. The first one is multi, which is something that I use for the most part. Multi analyzes the overall color, brightness, and composition of your frame and how those are distributed, and then it calculates the exposure based on those. This mode is generally recommended for the most amount of situations. The next mode here is center weighted, which gives emphasis to the center of the frame while calculating the exposure. So this is best suited for shooting portraits of subjects that are going to be in the center of the frame, or if you're shooting outside a window, like here, there's a window here, and you want to expose whatever's outside without exposing whatever's inside. That's when you would want to use center weighted. The next one is spot metering, which just gives emphasis to the spot. Wherever the spot moves on the frame, the exposure is going to be calculated depending on the position of that spot. So this is generally recommended for subjects that are backlit, or when you want to create those high contrasty images like the black and white ones, or you want to emphasize the shadowy areas and the bright areas in the frame. That's when you would want to use spot metering. And the last one is average, which just breaks down the entire frame into equal parts and then calculates the average of those parts and gives you the average exposure reading here. I don't generally use average, I only use multi, and I would sometimes use center weighted or spot as well, but average is something that I never use. The next item here is the shutter type. So the reason that I've put this here is so that I can switch from mechanical to electronic or vice versa, or I can choose to shoot with both. So in here right now, I have chosen mechanical plus electronic. So what it's going to do is it's going to use mechanical until the mechanical shutter maxes out. And if it determines a shutter speed that's above the maximum limit of the mechanical shutter, then the electronic shutter will come into play. You can also choose to just shoot with mechanical shutter or just with electronic shutter. One thing to keep in mind is if you're shooting in electronic shutter, your flash will not work. So for flash to work, you need to have mechanical shutter enabled, and we will come to flash in just a second here. The next setting is self timer. Very straightforward. So the way you would want to use a self timer is in situations if you want to be included in a photograph. So if you're taking a group picture and you want to be there, you don't always want to be behind the camera and you would like to be in front of the camera for a change, you would want to use self timer here. So you have 2 options, 2 seconds and 10 seconds. So use 2 seconds if you are a very fast runner. Use 10 seconds if you want to take your time before getting to the position. The next item I want to talk about is your flash setting. Remember that I mentioned earlier that if you want your flash to work, you need to be in mechanical shutter mode. If you switch to electronic shutter, see how the flash gets disabled. This is grayed out right now. So I'm going to switch back to mechanical shutter, and now I can go here and configure different flash settings for my camera. So you can choose one of these here according to what you want. The next item in the list is your subject detection setting. This is what uses the AI processing in the sensor to determine any non-human subjects that you want to photograph. So things like your animals, like your cat or dog, bird, if you are into bird photography, automobile, cars, motorcycles, airplanes, or trains. Now, generally when I use this mode, I'm only using it for automobile or motorcycle. If I want to get those slow panning shots outside, this is what I would want to use. Or if you are photographing your pets, you would want to use either animal or bird depending on what kind of pet you have. The next item is flicker reduction. This is something that is useful when you are indoors or you're surrounded by a lot of fluorescent lights, and those may introduce flicker in your shot. So this is when you would want to use flicker reduction to reduce the flicker. Next item here is LCD brightness. The reason that I've put this here is if I'm out shooting in broad daylight and I want to look at my screen and it's too bright outside, I would want to crack the brightness to the highest possible limit here. So this is why I have put this here. Finally, I want to talk about my AF mode. And to get here, you need to go in the AF MF setting, which is the second setting on the left. And on the first page, you will find the AF mode. So I have set it to all. And by setting this to all, it gives me access to every single autofocus mode that is available in the camera. So let's see how it works. Right now, as you can see that I have a single point autofocus mode, the small box there. If I want to change the size of it, I can just keep going like that and see how the size is increasing. And now it becomes a zone focus. If I keep going, the zone increases. If I keep going further, there are different sizes of the zone here that you can also toggle in the camera. And finally, it goes into the tracking mode where you can track a subject, which is the wide tracking mode. So basically, by doing all, I can take advantage of all of these in one place. So that's it for today, guys. I hope you found this video useful. And in the next video, I'm going to come back and show you how I have customized my custom 1 to custom 7 banks. And I will show you the recipes that I have configured on those. So stay tuned and I will be back in the next video. Bye.